I don't have any solution nor a prescription, but I've just got a few set of points which I thought are reasonable points in my view, which I'm very happy and open to discuss with you. So let me begin my story here. I start with a quote from a 1946 report called the Bore Committee report. This committee was set post-World War by the imperial government, Delhi, to figure out the status of town planning in Indian cities. So there is an important passage in this long report which says Madras is a classic case because it had a progressive land planning act. However, it has not made impressive strides, says Bore. He's partly right and partly wrong. Actually, it is the wrong part of his analysis which had a long-lasting and I would even say a bit of damaging effect on the city's development. So let me first look at the right part of his analysis. Bombay was the first city in 1915 to have the Town Planning Act. It was a very important step in the making of cities in India. And this act, modeled on the UK Act, like many others, actually allowed people to, the planners particularly, to levy betterment charges and pool land for making town planning schemes. But Chennai, which also started almost at the same time, but adopted the act only in 1920, went 3 steps forward. The first step it did was it said it made mandatory for the plans to provide housing for the poor, which the Bombay Act doesn't say. 2, it also made mandatory for all cities about 40,000 population to make a plan. The third one, which was actually rejected by Government of India, was that it said, look, town planning can be done only by acquiring land, okay? But it was unhappy with the compensation paid. So the Madras government proposed a 15% increase as a solution, which the Government of India said, no, we can't afford that extra money. So it was knocked out of it. So it was a progressive legislation in that sense. Second, it also had a long legacy of town planning, and particularly the influence of Patrick Geddes, who was here in 1911 and 1915, was remarkable and significant. Geddes never advised cities to take what Bombay and other cities did, which is setting up of town planning trust. Because he said, look, you can't build the cities in bits and pieces. You need to have a comprehensive plan. And second, he said the plan must be backed by detailed surveys. And the most important thing that he suggested to the Madras engineers, which they overlooked, he said, please don't build drains and stormwater alone and rely on it to conduct rainwater. He said, use the surface drainage. Of course, the British engineers overlooked it because they were afraid of stagnant water and they tried to fill the water bodies. That's another story. But the point I'm making is, it is true that it had progressive legislation. It also had people like Lanchester, disciple of Geddes, who was the first town planner for Chennai, appointed as a consultant, who prepared this very interesting report in 1980. And he thought about different ways of organizing cities and road networks. I'm not going to get into details of it. There were also, after the act, a town planning department was set, and Reginald Dan was the first town planner, a landscape architect from UK. And he is the author of, or he was the author of the Mambalam town planning scheme. And there was various schemes that were proposed for various parts of the city at the time. And there were also societies, for instance, this picture from the Hindu archives, which shows the foundation stone laying of Gandhinagar in 1948. That's Venkatachala Naidu, who's the president of the Madras Housing Society. And Gandhinagar was the first major town planning scheme or housing society post-independence, and it's actually extending the boundary of the city south of Adaya. Otherwise, if you see various maps, the city ends at Adaya. So this is a major expansion scheme. But however, Bore never acknowledged all this. He said, no, nothing of this would be, can be given credit, because in his mind, and so did with all the Delhi planners, and particularly Nehru. The idea of plan was in drafting a master plan. The notion of the master plan was deeply embedded in the discourse of national, particularly Nehru, personally drove the effort to plan for Delhi. In 1955, they set up TCPO, Town and Country Planning Organization. He wrote to the Ford Foundation and invited Albert Mayer to prepare the plan of Delhi. And Mayer prepared the first plan, the master plan of Delhi in 1962. And he was the person who understood the importance of this plan, and he realized the Delhi plan will be template for all the cities in India. And it was true. Not only Nehru supported the Delhi plan, through various means, all cities were convinced to prepare a master plan. The third 5-year plan allotted about 120 crores for this, for all the cities. And Madras jumped into this because it also bought, of course, we can't blame the town planners. Hindu ran a fantastic edit at the time appreciating the Delhi plan and urged the planners in Delhi, in Madras, to follow this. Now, what did this do? That's the point. Actually, Chennai started taking initial steps to work out a comprehensive scheme. The first scheme was the 1957 scheme. Unfortunately, I haven't seen the report. I only read newspaper reports about this plan. I don't know much about what was proposed, but the government rejected it. They said, not enough surveys, etc. Go back to the drawing board, come back with a new plan. The first comprehensive plan was prepared in 1959 and it was published in 1950. This is what appeared in the newspapers at the time. And you can see the seeds of what is going to be the long-lasting planning approach to Delhi. The first key idea is contain the city. The city can't keep growing, contain it. So in the 60s plan, the idea was to draw a 3-mile green belt, a circular ring road, and a circular road. It also proposed for the first time satellite towns, but it didn't articulate it enough, but it was a broad idea. But this too was rejected by the government because they figured out that the Americans are working in Delhi. They said, why not Chennai too? So they wrote to the US government, and Yale University, it's not just the LU-Yale connection Chennai has. The Yale planners were here in 1962. 3 big planners. Actually, one was not a planner, he was a professor of foreign studies. I don't know what was he doing, but nevertheless he was here. It was taken very seriously. Okay, there was a high-level team interacting with them. But these guys completely disappointed the government. They said, we are not going to give you town plan, no master plan. We'll give you principles. So again, they also said, look, we are not going to do the plan. We will set up a town planning college here. And we will ask the college to make the plan. And even expenses were worked out. It's about some 9 lakhs non-recurring expenditure and some 2.7 lakhs recurring expenditure. This would have been a radical idea of its times. I think the principle that was to develop local expertise, build capacity here, and try to work plans and ideas more contextually. But no government would like a humble plan, does it? So they wanted a grand vision and that was not coming. So this too was dropped. So they said, the plan so far was done by corporation. Now the government said the directorate should do the plan. So the Directorate of Town and Country Planning went and started doing this and came. This is the most critical document in the post-independent planning history, which is the 1971, sorry, not this is the 1967 interim plan, but what followed is important. And this too essentially took the approach of containing the city. Contain the population of the city, don't grow, don't let the city grow, have new nodes, urban centers, new administrative center. Imagine this idea, we would have had a new area government, new assembly much before all this tamasha happened. Somehow it wasn't. But one of the big projects that it conceptualized was a large park of 1,000 acres in the middle of the city. Okay, imagine had it been implemented, it would have been one of the great public assets that we would have had, but that was not to happen. Of course, it said, close the Buckingham Canal. No use. Let's use it for roads. And this kept coming later. But this is the most important document because this is the one which still shapes the planning of Chennai. I'll explain that in a bit. So the 67 plan was rejected because the government said, look, you're not planning for long term, I want detailed plans, but that's not the true reason. There was a political shift. DMK came to power in 67. And DMK, in its election manifesto, it was one of the few parties which put a lot of emphasis on cities, and particularly slums. Okay, so they clearly said, we need a comprehensive plan, and they said, let's work out a new plan altogether. So the first interim plan was done in 1971. Now, this is the first time you have a very detailed articulation of the spatial strategy for Chennai. Now, 3 satellite towns, Gomadipundi, Thiruvallur, and Sengundram. Bear in mind, even now we are talking about Thiruvallur. The idea was first proposed about 40 years ago. Okay, and you have 6 urban nodes spread all over. Of course, the policy is to contain. So this is the proposal which still pursues. But more than that, the most important and the damaging part that this plan did, which we are not still able to escape, is conceptualizing the city of Madras or Chennai as a city of corridors. See what happened, if you see, these are the 5 radials. Of course, this has developed now, the OMR, okay. This is the Chengalpet Road, the Poonamali Road. This is along the North Beach, and then this is going through Vyasapadi up to Andhra. Okay. Now, 1971 plan looked at this pattern, and then suddenly they found a visual similarity to a palm like that. Okay, this is the coast. These are the 5 corridors, and they had to rationalize this. They had to come with some idea. So then they did a case study, as all of us would do, and they figured out Copenhagen's plan, done in 1947, was a finger plan. But Copenhagen's plan, which still continues as an open plan, has a great idea behind it. The idea of the Copenhagen's plan was protect these green wedges. Have an intense urban corridor here with mass rapid transit system. So there was a plan, there was a purpose to this plan, to protect the wedges here. But the Chennai planners were quite happy with the visual similarity. Okay, they were not keen to perpetuate or sustain the principle behind this plan. So they conceptualized a city of corridors. Okay, then what follows is a logical extension of this. But before that, I want to make a point that radial plan was not the conscious choice of the city. These roads developed as a matter of historical contingencies. We know about the history of the St. Thomas Mount Road. We know that the Poonamali High Road was another colonial outpost. The north and the south beach, the north is the older road, that's where the native settlement was. The south was a kind of a marina. So it was, and also it connected San Tome, but that itself was not the purpose of that road. Now, if you see the 1918 Lanchester's plan, Lanchester is not recognizing this radial plan. It doesn't occur to him that it's a radial plan for good reasons. So what he is interested is to develop road networks and make a compact city. He's a smart planner. Okay. So, but what the planners who followed later, having developed a radial pattern, it is very easy now to plug all your proposals along this radial pattern. The nodes, the satellite towns, the land use plan, etc. Now, the 5 urban corridors were developed, growth centers along them, a ring rail, and 3 ring roads, which the inner ring road we already have. The genesis of the inner ring road is slightly different. I'm just briefly mentioning that. Then the outer and the intermediary bypass. Now, when I proposed this idea about year and a half ago, saying that this is the city of corridors, somebody challenged me and he said, you're wrong, because it's not an historical problem, it's a geographical problem. I said, why? He said, look, this is your eastern coast, or okay, this way, more eastern coast. So naturally the city has to develop like this, and it has to take a radial pattern. That's the way you can maximize the thing. And even to add a dose of authentic argument, he said, look, Banaras and all has the bow pattern and all that. It is okay. Now the point is, I have a clinching evidence, I told him, but not clinching, let's say a strong evidence to counter this. I said, look, in 2000, Chennai wanted to be a global city. It was competing with Hyderabad and Bangalore, etc. So this had, I mean, you can't have a presentation without Amma's picture, okay? So he said you can't take name, it's almost comparing Chennai with every big great town in the world that you can think of. So one of the driving projects of this global city was the IT industry, okay? So at the time, every city had different models of developing the IT sector. There were sector models, there were cluster models, there were new town models. Bangalore, for instance, picked the cluster model, a kind of a township. But look at what Chennai did. Chennai conceptualized IT space as a corridor, a 35-kilometer corridor, and that beats logic. Why would you want to do a 35-kilometer corridor, and that too very close to an ecologically sensitive East Coast road? Knowing well all the investment is going to come there and it's really going to put pressure. But that's a different matter. But look at the spatial pattern the city is thinking. It is still thinking as corridors. It's not able to break that corridor which the 1971 plan put. Mind you, this is 40 years later. So this history, this pattern is deeply embedded. And today, I'll come to it later, it still goes, okay? Now, this is the corridor and we know what's the hazard of traveling, the time it takes, the inefficient use of land, etc. Now, if you have any further doubts, I tell you, please look at how Chennai politicians, where they put their statues, on the corridors, okay? So there's a big competition, isn't it, for statues? Mount Road, Beach Road, take all the roads. So it's what Marcel Berman would say, the halo of the highway, okay? So the Chennai politicians bought into this. And that perpetuates that city of corridor even more strongly. Okay. Now we'll move to the first official plan. All of us think the city's master plan was done in 1975, and I hope what I so far presented would ask you to reconsider that. In 75, there was a reason, because the 1971 plan was very detailed, the report was very impressive. You should see the poorly produced pictures, cyclo-styled, etc. You can forgive that for that, but it's an impressive study. I'm assuming it's all accurate, okay? But it's an impressive study. The proposals, though flawed, has an internal logic to it. But 75, the same DMK government actually refused to accept the 71 plan. In fact, when 72, when CMDA or MMDA was set up, it was set up as an ad hoc committee to implement the 71 plan. The master plan comes a bit later, okay? Now here, it was a big event. People realized that this is going to be the first official plan. Can you imagine a 4-page supplement in the Hindu about this great seminar on town planning with all articles and well-informed articles in this, and big announcements, etc. So the plan was prepared in 1975, and it took a little time because at the time CMDA was set after the DDA was set up in Delhi. When DDA was set up in 71, then Chennai also decided to have a development authority. It set it up in 72, and then once you create authority, they can't implement the whole plan. So you have to prepare a new plan, and the new plan was prepared. The new plan was not really broadly very different. It kind of continued with the 71 plan. Containment of the city, the radial roads, the satellite towns, all those ideas continue. But it made two crucial departures, which is important for us to know. One is, for the first time, the plan is talking about key projects. So it is moving from a plan model to a project model, which in itself is not a bad idea. But the question is, what kind of projects you identify and how it ties up with the plan is the thing. Second, this is the time when World Bank comes into funding. Okay? So the government of Madras actually initially announced in the assembly they're going to seek 300 crores from World Bank, but finally it comes down to about 160 crores of assistance. But the problem is once you go to World Bank, the World Bank is asking for recovery. So it's talking about 70-80% recovery and a 20% rate of return of investment. So this cues in a certain sense of priority. And again, World Bank has a certain priority of project funding. So the planners are always smart. If the money is coming, then they will adjust the plan and they'll get the money and they'll still do the various projects. So that was the two key departures. That's a very interesting proposal at that time, which was the circular railway, which is now the MRTS corridor, which goes up to St. Thomas Mount and goes all the way through Annanagar, Villivakam, and then comes somewhere near Enno. Had this been implemented, and imagine this is actually not the dirty MRTS, but a much better run this. So we would have had a very different mobility structure in this city. So the city is shaped not only by the plans that was implemented, the city was also shaped by the plans that were not implemented as well. Okay. Now, an important part in the history of Chennai was the 1980 plan by Alan Turner. This is again British connection we have. Under the Colombo plan, a British aid, Alan Turner and Associates, an UK-based firm, was invited. This is one of the most sensible plans that we have heard so far. It was not a master plan, it was a broad structure plan. So what it was proposing, it first said the master plans done so far will not work. Let's drop them. Why? Because you can't contain a city. It's impossible to contain a city. City will grow, and plans don't have the power to contain the city. Second, it said you can't redistribute activities and all that. Okay? And they also made a sensible thing. They said no radial growth, that's inefficient. You will have to build very close to the city periphery, okay? And no satellite towns till this periphery gets built up. And more important, it realized the potential of urban agriculture for the first time. It doesn't use the word urban agriculture in its report, but it makes a detailed set of maps. It shows the potential agriculture area, the water bodies, then a few more maps, and then eventually identify places that can be built. And its recommendation was, let's build this periphery very densely. And then let's talk about expansion of the city. This is by far the most reasonable idea. Okay. It also made a very important suggestion, which was also not implemented, that it said, look, CMDA has to become a think tank, which looks at how to plan a city and not get immersed in the building permit and regulatory business. Because what we need is a capacity to conceptualize this city, make broad plans, and do a coordination thing. But somehow this suggestion was not taken until there. I really pity the planners who are good friends of mine, who do a great job in CMDA, but they're immersed in dispensing files of permission and all that. But then who will conceptualize that city? Which is the think tank today in the city? So that's why we end up outsourcing the plan, which itself is not a bad idea. But if you outsource a plan to somebody, or rather if you outsource thinking to somebody and receive the plan, then we should have the capacity to review and critically analyze the plan. That is the kind of an alternative capacity that we need to build. But unfortunately, I don't think that exists. Now, 71 was the first master plan, 20 years gone, 2000. They want to do the first master plan. And second master plan was prepared in 95, it was aborted for good reasons. It was the first plan done in the post-liberalization phase. It talks about private investment, it talks about ACZs, etc. It talks about a thin regulation. In fact, there's hardly any regulation there. It's called the minimum intervention strategy. You can have commercial use on any roads on 16 meters and 12 meters, multi-story building anywhere on a certain road width, etc. But this plan was aborted because for the first time, citizens of Madras protested in a vehement manner. They said this plan, there was no consultancy, there was no public consultancy, because the public consultancy so far was, you put the plan, according to the Act, you have to open it for 60 days of public objection. What happens to those objections? We don't know. There's no real concerted effort for public consultancy. CAG, Interim, Exenora, all of them went to court. They went to court in an argument saying, first of all, there's only an English edition. There's no Tamil edition. Two, at the time it was priced at 1,000 rupees, this report. while the early reports were priced at 25 and 30 rupees and all that. So they said, how will you expect people to read this, buy this? So they got an interim stay, and the court said, let's get a Tamil version done. But eventually the court turned the argument around, and this is a very strange judgment. The court said, no need to consult individually. There's no need. A paper advertisement is sufficient, and consultancy that happens through the paper advertisement is sufficient enough. But INTAC and CAG lost the case. So the CMD revived this plan, sent it to government. The government said it's already 5 years. The case dragged till 2000. So a new plan was done. This is the current plan, published in 2008, and in a very small way I was part of it. I was in the subcommittee on housing. It's a very interesting story. This plan, unlike the previous plans, did a Tamil version, had a lot of consultation, etc. But I have to tell you a story. I was a journalist then with the Hindu, and I was just interviewing the vice chairman and the secretary, so we were talking about it, and a senior secretary walked into it. He didn't realize I was a journalist. So he was telling the secretary, sir, in the pasanga, they will ask all these questions, sir. Just take it, sir. So the member secretary is sitting on his edge. He's trying to tell him, no, there was a journalist sitting here. Please don't make those comments, etc. So, but at least there was an initial effort to have a consultancy. It really didn't have great explicit ideas. It carried most of it, but a couple of important points. It continued with the satellite towns idea. It had a good aspiration. It wanted the share of public transport to increase to 70-30. That is, 70% of the trips will be made using public transport. Okay. It also passed the thing of protecting the aquifer recharge area, which was basically south of Thiruvanmiyur. For a long time, construction south of Thiruvanmiyur was not permitted. But you know what happens to most of our building rules. The compliance is poor and so on, and eventually the whole thing was removed. So what's really going to happen to the aquifer recharge is a bigger question that we'll face in future. Now, this is the last slide of my first part, which is the current plan. You must have read in the newspapers that the government of Madras, Tamil Nadu has announced the Chennai mega region of 8,800 square kilometers. Now, the justification given to it is that the city's population has expanded so much. We are currently talking about from roughly about 8 to 9 million in this peripheries, including the peripheries, to what we are expecting around 13 million in 2026. So this is a huge city, but not as huge as probably even Calcutta and Bombay are in fact far more than this. So now, in the absence of reviewing the existing plans and its effectiveness, we have a deep suspicion about this move. Okay, why we have a deep suspicion about this move is because if you do not have if you have not reviewed your past plans, if you have not evolved, not the plan itself, but the principles of how to do a plan, then I suspect, maybe I'm wrong, but I like to be challenged. I suspect this move is primarily to take over of many resources in the water, for instance. Already you have difficulties in dumping your waste, correct? You have to find something. You can't keep on doing it in Pallikarna. So where will you do? You have to go somewhere else. That's the thing. So again, these kind of moves actually facilitates quick urbanization of the wetlands and agricultural lands. It provides a certain justification. This is a suspicion, it's an allegation maybe, but in the absence of a counter evidence, I'm really worried about it. I'm told already GTZ, and the German firm, has been approached to do the plan, and they're going to do it pro bono. So whenever somebody says I'm doing pro bono or some development agency, my radar even, so I'm just really wondering what's happening. So actually, this time around, I think, unlike not waiting like the second master plan, there must be a city alliance which kind of proactively engages with the city development. And that's basically the city kind of lacks in, because you can't wait for the government to approach and consult, and it'll be too late for that. Okay. Now, the second part of the thing is basically to talk about the broad issue. There are many issues, but I'm just going to pick 4 issues today to talk about. The first thing, if you see the plan of 1951, it was 1.67. The population at the time was 1.4. The 67 plan was scared of 4.8 million. It said, oh, by 1991 it will be 4.8, what will he do to the city? If you move to the 71 plan, they were worried about 5.34, but the city kept on growing. The 1995 plan was worried about 9.5 million population, but the city kept on growing. So there is a fear of population, but you try to contain it, but the city doesn't seem to give a damn about it. It goes because the plan is an ineffective tool. The population growth and development is far more complex and dynamic. It cannot be contained by a plan. For example, when this plan was done, there is no mention of an IT corridor. There is no mention of an IT investment. But within a couple of years, the whole landscape changes. There is this kind of a skewed development, there is a large number of people living in the southern part of the city, etc. Now, this is to prove that the city has been continuously growing. The first clear estimate of Chennai was done in 1871, and the first detailed analysis of the demography of Chennai was done in 1938 by C.W. Ranson. It's a very interesting book. It's called The City in Transition, which he compares Chennai with Bombay and Calcutta and says Chennai is a city of shopkeepers, okay? Because this has got nothing like no industries, no big deal. It's a city of shopkeepers, but it's growing on its institution and trade and other things. Actually, till 1901, the estimates were not bad. In fact, if you read the 1901 census, the person who was in charge of census has a very hilarious anecdotes there. So one guy went enumerating to a village, and there was a samadhi. So he said the saint is dead and he's buried, but please, he's still alive, all of us believe. So the enumerator said alive, and he wrote down the name. So he next went to a temple, and he wrote door number 71, name of the resident Ganesha, year 200, religion Hindu. I'm not making up this story here. Please read this. In this book, it's an interesting footnote in this book that it appears. So the estimates were not accurate. But what it shows, which is even otherwise evident, if you see from 1941, the population is steadily increasing. Okay? And we are looking at 5.5 million within city and outside area. And we are placed with currently, compared to the other 3 cities, we are 8.6, and Bangalore is close. This is a 2011 census. Okay, this is the larger urban agglomeration population. It's not just the city alone. So the city is growing, and it is going to grow. Because the investments in this state is predominantly here. 12% of the urban population of Tamil Nadu lives in Chennai. Its economic output is substantial. If you look at the quantity of investments in the city, that's not really coming down. Compare it with all this big talk that's going on and developing tier 2 cities and tier 3 cities. Hardly happening. But it's rolling on other forces, but nothing comparable to Chennai. So the Chennai city will grow, and we have to come to terms with that. How do we manage that growth is the challenge. Now, so the answer to this is not a containment, not the mega region. There's an interesting institute in Santa Fe which discusses about scaling of cities, and it says every time a population doubles, the economic productivity increases by 130%. Along with it comes challenges. He said unless the city constantly innovates, it cannot sustain this growth. It will collapse after some point in time. So if we do not innovate, what otherwise could have been a productive growth, will not deliver the promise that it supposed to deliver. Talking about certain innovations, for example, I'm using the regional plan. I'm deeply concerned about what's currently happening on ground. See, there's no point just declaring 8,000 square kilometers. What is the current thinking about region? An important concept is, for example, this is by Richard Foreman, who has written extensively on urban ecology and regional landscapes. He's saying any landscape, you will have to conceptualize it in terms of patches, corridors, and matrix. Patches being the rivers, the patches being the green open spaces, agricultural land, and this thing, and this is the corridor, etc. And he says when you do the regional plan, you will not, and you cannot afford to challenge these matrix, corridors, and patches. In fact, the plan must integrate them in better. I'm not too sure whether the regional plan is, it may be too early, but I'm just waving some red flags here. The second, if you take the Randstad model in Netherlands, you don't have a single large mega city. You have a interconnected cities. Let's say we can choose any 3 cities which can be developed, and each city can retain its own identity. Why should Kanchipuram be a suburb of Chennai after 40 years and 50 years? Why can't it have? Why can't we protect the agricultural land in between? We may end up, but I'm saying let's have a conscious plan. So what is the alternative for this is something that we need. So we need innovative, radical ideas to go forward. Grand visions will also not help. Okay, we had global city and now smart city. Less said the better of the smart city. Scholars say there are 3 types of smart cities. One kind of smart city is a techno-driven, it's a technology-driven, it's a techno-utopia. Okay? The other kind of a smart city is what empowers people to participate in governance, building up the city, etc., and the great examples of it. The third kind of a model is an hybrid model which combines both, but actually comes up with new spatial patterns. Not many examples of them, but that's the third model. You ask where the Indian smart is, particularly Chennai smart city, I would say it's a peculiar fourth kind. Why it's a peculiar fourth kind? If you look at the investment pattern, 80% is on area development, which is Srinagar. 20% of the investment is on city level investment. In case of Chennai, the city level investment is a command and control center. It is a project picked from the shelf of IBM. It may be useful, but is it the priority is the question. Now, we know the story of Tinagar. It was prepared somewhere in 2011-12. It is now pushed under the smart city thing. Is that the priority is the question. Of course, the justification is what you do in Tinagar is replicable. It's scalable. I doubt it. So the second thing, all grand visions fragment a city. This is a study that I've done with a good friend of mine, who's Noma Pandian, where we looked at what happened to Chennai during the global city. It fragments the city. How does it fragment? Some portions are built and it is exhibited as an exhibition. Some you can't do anything, like for Mylapore, you can't showcase it, but you can't condemn it also. So you museumize it. There is a whole large section of the city which is in the backyard. Okay, so there is a fragmentation of the city, and all grand visions normally tend to do that. Now I'm taking, okay, the meta plans are not working. The corridor plan is not working. I'll demonstrate that with just a couple of small evidences. I'm taking a place outside Vandalur, a place which I'm familiar recently. An 8 kilometer by 5 kilometer stretch, an 8 kilometer by 5 kilometer stretch. If you, this is just a quick grid analysis. We can do it precisely using GIS, etc. You see currently about 48% of the land is not utilized. Why it is not utilized? Because there is no road network. Okay? Since the road network doesn't exist, development is hugging the existing roads. Then you are expecting developers to have huge chunks of properties in different areas, and we are not making enough road network, because then the implication is the supply of serviced land, which is essential for the city to grow in a compact way, is not available. So what we have is a sprawl and an inefficient use of the most precious land resource. When 1,186 square kilometers of the metropolitan area, which is the current region, is not compactly built, what justification can we have of extending the region to 8,000 square kilometers? Okay. Now, if you look at that, if the current density within the cities, Chennai's density is amongst the highest in the world. It's about 260, 270 people per hectare. What we have in the periphery is about 27, and I assume between the master plan and now even take it 30 people per hectare, or even take it 35 people. So here we are having 150,000 people living in 40 square kilometers, which is 1/10 of the existing city, which is 426. I'm not saying we should completely build this even on the water body, etc., but I'm saying if we do not have a plan to do the road network and have a compact city, then we are continuing to inefficiently use the land, and that's not acceptable. Now, I'm proposing, in the form of a question, that should we give up the meta plan and go to detailed town planning schemes? Because Chennai was actually built not by the master plan alone, but by the housing board. Ananagar, Besan Nagar, Ashok Nagar. Okay, sorry. This is a very interesting article written by Nanavelu, who was part of the Madras Improvement Trust and later became part of the Madras Housing Board, which is now the TNHB. In 1964, he had a full-page article in the Hindu, where he is outlining the various schemes that are proposed. All this shaded part, this is Besan Nagar. Okay. This is the Kodambakam Pudur scheme, which is currently the KK Nagar, Ashok Nagar. This is the code to, I just forget, this is the Ananagar, Shananagar area and so on. Okay. Now, a large amount of buildings were built. Of course, the approach was acquire land and build. That may not be possible, but today, if you want to take stock of the best housing areas, where there is a decent network of roads and there are amenities, it is in these parts of the city. Of course, it would have gentrified over a period of time. That's a different matter because cities will be changing. How to elongate the subsidy for the LIG, etc., it's a different matter. We'll talk about it at the end. Then DMK's main contribution to the city was slum and clearance board, and it took it as its great agenda to provide housing for slums. Now, what is the current plan's approach to housing? It does two things. It increases the area under residential land use. So it's trying to solve the housing problem by land use planning. That won't work. I'll come to you why. See, if you look at the various plans, there's a very concerted, conscious attempt to supply housing. Okay, 3 lakhs in 67, that was the ambition. Clear 548 slums. Same way with Singh's. Even the first master plan, which proposed the site and services scheme, consciously looked at housing. Now today, this land use planning and market-led incentives, which is the driving solution in second master plan, is not working. Today, entire CMA is not affordable. The question is, what is affordable? Of course, if you use the Deepak Parikh's committee, that for LIG it should not be 4 times the house gross household income and 5 times for the MIG, or even if you take the developers, which is more or less closer to this, and if you see what is the current supply of units, this is the latest report from Knight and Frank, okay, and you can see this is the ticket size, okay. This is the affordable range for somebody who is earning 40,000 rupees. If you use this formula, you should have a minimum 40,000 rupees today in order to access the lowest segment of housing that is provided by private market, okay, which it's not adequate. So the housing, affordable housing, is primarily supplied through the informal sector. The greatest enterprise activity is in this Kupa. You go there, there is a hut which is divided into 2. One portion is rented out for a construction labor for 100 rupees. If you need a lamp, you have to pay some 30 rupees or 40 rupees more. It's in great demand. That's where the supply of informal housing is today. The formal housing is not. So, if we have to address the question of housing, which I think is particularly affordable housing, we'll have to come with alternatives. Some of the alternatives are, in fact, I wrote an article with supposed to be provocative. I don't know how it was taken. So I said it's time for Amma flats. So where I said your government, instead of giving Amma booze and Amma laptop and so I said, can we can we move to a procurement model? Can we do this and subsidize it? Not for free, but can we do this because the housing agencies do not have the capacity to deliver. Okay? The supply of land is a question. We can have multiple options to do that. Or how do you elongate the subsidy that is given? Because the usual complaint is I give it, after 10 years they sell it, etc. Why not? Every citizen in this city has to benefit the growth. The property value has to be captured. So what they do abroad is the community land trust model, where the land is given to an NGO or a trust which builds a housing and gives it for 30% less. So when you exit that housing after 10 years, you can sell it to the current market value but 30% less of that market value. So always the selling price is 30% less. So the subsidy is kind of stretched for a long period of time, and I don't think we are even thinking about it. Now this is my last part of my presentation. I mean, I hope I'm not saying that nothing is possible, plans are bad, let's give up planning, and it's not exactly what I'm saying. There is a usefulness to planning, there has to be a purpose of planning, but we'll have to realize what we can plan and what we cannot plan, and that's my last slide. I believe there can only 6 things a plan can do, and that's all it should do. First, road network is important. If you're talking mobility, today's average speed of motorized vehicle in Chennai is 15 kilometers. If you look at national service standards, it says 30 kilometers. We are never going to get there. We are going to crawl, then we are going to do bumper to bumper. So unless we create the network, which is very much in the hands of the plan. Okay, of course, the second master plan says they are preparing grid network. Anna University was charged with preparing grid network for 29 villages. They so far delivered 1. Vijayawada was given charge of another 29 villages. They have done 7, slightly better. Okay, but I don't know what the status of the plan, but at least that is what it is. Now, so these two are connected. Mobility is fundamental, and to develop road network. And the road network can be only done if you have a combination of a meta plan and a town planning scheme. We have to get back to the town planning scheme, not through the method of land acquisition, but through the method of land pooling, which Gujarat to a certain extent has successfully demonstrated. I'm not saying Gujarat is kind of a torchbearer for the whole country, but if there is a good model, why not? Second, or the third point, is something which the market will never produce, is public assets. You see all these great neighborhoods. They have community halls, they have parks, they have nice places. That's created. That market will never provide. As one advertisement said of a big housing complex, it had everything except graveyard. Pandyan used to tell me, Srivathsan, the only time these guys will get connected cities when they die. Okay, because they have to come to the city to cremate it. It's a brilliant observation, a great scholar. Anyway, the fourth thing, environmental features can also be protected by plan alone. It cannot be protected in any other manner. Market is not interested. In fact, some of the housing board schemes are in the river tank bed and the river beds and so on. Okay, so the only way we can do that is through plan. And I'm saying the meta plan is not sufficient because the meta plan talks about a large planning strategy. We'll have to come down to a town planning scheme. And 5, the second master plan's market-based incentives have not delivered at all. What kind of incentives? They said additional 100% FSI if you're building affordable housing. None has, I can't say none, hardly any has been produced. It said that 10% of every development project should be reserved for housing units. None has been produced. If you look at the TNHP's proposal for the Tansy land, even TNHP is not keen about producing social units. So there has to be a concerted effort to producing social. And of course the better service delivery, which is all connected to it. Well, this itself would not be sufficient, and there are a few things to be done outside governance. And increasingly planners are talking about the principle of subsidiarity. The principle of subsidiarity is primarily the central authority takes jobs only what the locals can't do. That's the principle of subsidiarity. So if we do not have a well-structured governance, particularly a very well-strengthened local, it can be any unit, it can be an LPA unit, it can be a town panchayat unit, that is a matter of discussion. But we are increasingly seeing that unless it is planned at both the smaller scale and at the bigger scale, things are not working. And planning the bigger scale, currently we have seen the second master plan's effort to deliver detailed plans are not working. Because the detailed plans themselves are nothing but a recording of what is there on the ground. And half of the detailed plans are not yet been prepared. And we have to integrate land record use and water management. We have been, in fact, Tamil Nadu has made great progress in the computerization of land records. It has to be made public, it has to be made evident, so I know every piece of land, what kind of a property is it? Is it a nattam, it's a water body, and people should know, and it must be all integrated to it. Participation through data sharing. centralized single authority planning will not work anymore. We have seen. Okay, we are now talking about. In fact, I read a very interesting piece of article about thin urbanism, of how you don't prepare hard plans, but prepare thin plans and allow it to be discussed and see it on the ground and see what's happening, and then come back and review. And if you really expect want a participation, then that cannot be done in a data opaque city. How do you make data available? That's a challenge. Community urban enterprise, and I'm very impressed with what's happening in our neighborhood, which is the Urur Kopam, and there's a lot of effort that's going on, and I saw a couple of proposals by architects of how to develop the thing. Now the problem is that this will not be recognized by the state. It will not have the legitimacy. But you can't build a big city just sitting at one office. There's a lot of interesting groundswell community urban projects, and that must be recognized.